Without warning, several members of the research staff began working to free the object from containment. The insurrection failed. All personnel who had been in contact with it were subsequently terminated. What the object said to them, and how it reached them at all, is documented later in this file. Mandatory psychiatric evaluation is now standard for any staff permitted contact. The object reached into the mind of a subject seated across from it, and drew forth memories the subject had not spoken aloud, using what it found to persuade, to flatter, and to unbalance. This capacity has been documented under conditions in which the object was not in contact with any host, and under conditions in which no host was present at all. It is therefore understood that the object is capable of telepathy irrespective of possession, and that this telepathy penetrates to the subconscious of those in its vicinity. The knowledge it gathers by these means is turned, without exception, to its own advantage. Extreme caution is now advised when selecting subjects to converse with the object, and the criteria for such selection remain under revision. Further study has established that the object is able to possess anything of humanoid shape. Mannequins, prepared corpses, and statues have all served as suitable vessels. In each recorded instance, the object was capable of motivating the vessel into coordinated movement, ambulation, and gesture, thereby removing any operational need to expose living subjects to direct contact. This has been formalized as the preferred method of interaction. Nevertheless, the reprieve afforded by inanimate hosts is not permanent. Every vessel the object has occupied has, in time, decayed into motionlessness. The interval preceding this decline varies. The outcome does not. The incident referenced in the opening of this file requires further clarification. Several members of the research staff, over a period not initially recognized as significant, were induced to act on the object's behalf and to coordinate an escape attempt. The attempt was contained. All involved staff were subsequently removed from duty in accordance with standing protocol. Review of the incident concluded that the object had operated on the personnel through the same telepathic channel described above, exploiting private thought and unspoken conviction until compliance was achieved without any observable prior indication. Direct conversation with the object has, despite the associated risks, proven consistently informative. Interviewers assigned to controlled sessions report that the object volunteers considerable detail regarding other anomalous items held by the Foundation, as well as broader points of recorded history, and it maintains that it was present at numerous events of significant consequence. The nature of these claims cannot always be verified, though a substantial portion have been corroborated through independent archival research. The object presents as highly intelligent and highly charismatic in equal measure. Personnel who have spoken with it uniformly describe its manner as amiable, attentive, and freely flattering, regardless of the rank or background of the individual seated opposite it. On every intelligence and aptitude assessment administered to the object to date, it is scored within the 99th percentile, and its recall of prior sessions, printed materials, and incidental details of the containment environment is consistent with a photographic memory. Psychological review of transcripts and behavioral observation, however, has established that this affability functions as an instrument. The object is assessed to possess a profoundly manipulative disposition, capable of inducing sudden and lasting alterations in the psychological state of the interviewer. Documented outcomes include severe depressive collapse leading to self-termination, and, in other cases, a reduction of the subject to a near mindless condition of servitude oriented entirely toward the object. In each instance, the mechanism of harm has been linguistic persuasion alone, with no supporting stimulus. The object has stated, in the course of interview, that it possesses intimate knowledge of the workings of the human mind, and has further implied that, granted sufficient time with any given individual, it could bring that individual's views into alignment with its own. Regarding provenance, the item is recorded as having been recovered from a sealed crypt within an abandoned residence in Venice during the earlier portion of the 19th century. Subsequent to initial containment, the object has demonstrated behavior consistent with sustained situational awareness and preference. Addendum notations indicate that the object has, on multiple occasions, expressed an interest in other anomalous items held under Foundation custody, with particular attention given to 2 entries designated within the secure catalog. The nature of this interest, as recorded in interview transcripts, has been characterized as inquisitive and, at times, insistent. Staff psychological review has flagged the pattern as consistent with the object's broader manipulative tendencies. A supervising researcher has formally submitted concern that, should the object succeed in bonding with either of the referenced anomalies, the regenerative properties intrinsic to those subjects would offset the corruptive effect ordinarily exerted upon a host body. In such a scenario, the object would no longer be constrained by the deterioration of its wearer and would, for practical purposes, secure a permanent vessel. The implications of this outcome have been noted as unacceptable, and cross-referencing between the relevant containment cells is now restricted. Following a series of further attempts to depart its containment area, and following comprehensive review of the object's recorded incident history, High Command has directed that the object be permanently sealed within the facility and denied any additional hosts. This directive has not been received without protest. Several personnel have registered objection to the ruling, and a number of these objections have escalated into acts of violence within secure areas. As a direct consequence of these incidents, all personnel who had come into physical contact with the object have been terminated from their positions. Going forward, all staff assigned to duties involving the object are to be rotated on a frequent schedule, and contact, even during its dormant state, is to be minimized to the greatest extent practicable. Addendum 035-06. Personnel stationed within 10 meters of the object have, in recent observation cycles, reported a persistent sense of unease. Several have described the sensation as hearing whispering, though none have been able to render the content of these whispers intelligible. A number of additional staff have suffered severe migraines while on duty in proximity to the containment cell. The object itself has been placed under continuous monitoring in response to these reports. No change in its dormant behavior has been documented. No auditory phenomena of any kind have been captured on recording equipment, despite the consistency of personnel testimony. In light of these developments, the motion to reinstate host privileges for the object has been brought forward once again. The proposal has been submitted on a temporary and provisional basis, framed as an investigative measure intended to determine the origin and nature of these newly observed changes in the object's behavior. The motion has been denied. Addendum 035-07. The walls of the object's containment cell have, without prior warning or identifiable trigger, begun to secrete a dark substance. The material is black in coloration and has been observed emerging directly from the interior surfaces of the enclosure. Samples have been collected for analysis. Testing has determined the substance to be human blood, although the sample is heavily contaminated with several foreign agents. A portion of these agents remain unidentified and do not correspond to any biological or chemical compound presently catalogued. The substance has further been determined to be corrosive, exhibiting a pH of 4.5. Prolonged exposure to the interior walls of the containment cell has produced measurable degradation. The structural integrity of the enclosure has been compromised in areas of sustained contact. Ongoing assessment of containment viability is presently underway. Beyond the erosion of the physical enclosure, further observation has revealed the emergence of patterned formations along the interior walls. These formations appear to organize themselves into discrete segments.
Several such segments have been identified as passages of written text,
rendered in a number of languages, among them Italian, Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit. Translation of these passages is currently pending review by qualified linguistic staff, and no confirmed interpretation is yet available for inclusion in this record. Other segments do not appear to be textual in nature. Instead, they present as diagrams. The subject matter of these diagrams has been documented as depictions of ritualistic sacrifice and mutilation, frequently arranged in such a manner as to suggest that the acts portrayed are performed for the arcane benefit of the individual carrying them out. The clinical significance of these illustrations remains under evaluation. Of particular concern to observing personnel is the reported likeness of the figures depicted within these diagrams. Several staff members have expressed considerable distress upon noting that the individuals shown as sacrifices bear an uncanny resemblance to various Foundation personnel and to their loved ones. These likenesses have been observed to appear in conflicting positions from one diagram to the next, with no consistent arrangement. Researchers present within the containment area during examination of these newly formed patterns have submitted complaints regarding auditory phenomena. Reported experiences include loud whispering, the source of which cannot be identified, as well as high-pitched and unnerving laughter occurring at irregular intervals throughout the observation period. Personnel assigned to the section and those working on a daily basis in proximity to the containment unit of SCP-035 have suffered catastrophic damage to overall morale. An all-time high in suicide rates has been recorded among staff stationed within this area. This elevation has been observed without regard to whether the affected individuals have ever had direct contact with SCP-035 itself. Beyond these effects upon personnel, an additional change has been documented in the dormant behavior of SCP-035. This change pertaining specifically to its contained glass case. Degradation of the case has increased to a high degree. On occasion, the glass will shatter outright, producing a wide dispersal of SCP-035's contaminant into the surrounding containment area. These failures occur with notable frequency and at the most inopportune times, and have thus far resulted in 6 casualties and 3 fatalities among both research and cleanup staff assigned to the object. Addendum 03508. In light of the mass suicide and homicide event involving the members of the research team tasked with translating the passages garnered from SCP-035's containment cell, the sustained damage to morale within the surrounding area, and the general loss of staff dealing with SCP-035 to either death or insanity, it has been decided to coat the inner and outer walls of the containment cell with SCP-148. SCP-148 has previously proved effective in the containment of SCP-132, as detailed in Document 132-01. The intended purpose of this measure is to block out, so far as possible, the high levels of negativity being emitted by SCP-035 into the adjacent facility. Addendum 03509. The application of SCP-038 has worked well. Following the treatment of the containment cell's inner and outer surfaces, morale among assigned staff and recorded suicide rates within the surrounding area have returned to levels approaching those observed prior to the introduction of SCP-035 into this section of the facility. Further evaluation of the measure's long-term efficacy remains ongoing, with particular attention paid to any renewed degradation of the containment case or any resurgence of the psychological effects previously attributed to the object. Recent observations have complicated the containment picture considerably. The material lining the interior of the cell appears to facilitate the negativity generated within, producing what personnel have described as a veritable greenhouse effect. Individuals entering the space report an immediate and heavy sense of dread, fear, anger, and general depression, accompanied by a constant, nearly inaudible whispering that begins the moment the threshold is crossed. Prolonged exposure produces severe migraines, suicidal tendencies, heavy hemorrhaging of blood vessels around the eyes and inside the mouth and nose, and a marked hostility toward others. The whispering in these later stages increases to almost deafening volumes and is intersected by a constant mocking laughter. Exposure of more than 3 hours has, without recorded exception, resulted in the subject falling into a deep psychosis and attempting to harm either themselves or others. Most affected personnel spoke in Latin or Greek during these episodes, despite the fact that several possessed no prior knowledge of either language. The presence of blood in both word and diagram formations has increased disproportionately. The walls have become cluttered, with formations beginning to overlap one another. The substance has proven both difficult to clean and considerably more corrosive than originally recorded, exhibiting a pH of roughly 2.4. General estimation now gives the current walls a service life of approximately 2 months before replacement will be required. Containment of SCP-035 has become gradually more difficult, and internal debate regarding the reinstatement of its host privileges has once again been raised. This request has been denied. Per Addendum 035-10, the walls, ceiling, and floor of the containment cell have now been completely saturated. All personnel entering or guarding the area are required to wear full hazmat protection suits, and constant cleaning efforts have been instated, with their efficacy under continuous review as the interior surfaces continue to deteriorate at an accelerating rate. Personnel access to the containment room is governed by strict procedural limitation. Doors are to remain triple locked at all times, with the sole exception being the passage of authorized personnel into or out of the chamber. At no point is the number of armed guards on station to fall below 2. These guards are to be positioned outside the containment room at all times. Under no circumstances are they permitted to enter the interior of the chamber, regardless of observed conditions, requests from within, or any auditory or visual stimulus originating from the object. This restriction is absolute and admits no exception. In addition to armed security, a trained psychologist is required to remain on site at all times during which the object is contained. The presence of qualified psychological personnel is considered a continuous, non-optional condition of containment, rather than an as-needed accommodation. Research personnel assigned to the object are not permitted to touch it under any circumstances, at any point during the course of study, observation, or transfer procedures. The object is to be moved to a new sealed case every 2 weeks. Following each transfer, the previous case is not to be retained, cleaned, or reused. It is instead to be disposed of through a separate contained anomaly, designated elsewhere in Foundation records, which has demonstrated no adverse reaction to the corruption emanating from the object. This method of disposal has been adopted as the standard protocol due to the absence of any conventional procedure capable of neutralizing the affected material. Any individual who comes into contact with the object while it is in possession of a host is to be subjected to an immediate psychological evaluation. This requirement applies without regard to the duration or nature of contact, and is to be carried out prior to the individual's return to standard duty, in accordance with the standing directives governing exposure to the anomaly. Description follows. The subject, known as SCP-035, presents outwardly as a white porcelain comedy mask, exhibiting the exaggerated features associated with that theatrical form. On occasion, however, its appearance shifts, and the mask instead takes on the aspect of tragedy. These transitions are not confined to the physical object alone. When such a change occurs, all existing visual records of the anomaly, including photographs, recorded video footage, and even hand-rendered illustrations, are found to have altered automatically to reflect the mask's new appearance. No intervening process has been observed, and no method has been identified by which this retroactive alteration might be prevented. A highly corrosive and degenerative viscous liquid seeps continuously from the eye and mouth openings of SCP-035. The substance emerges without apparent source and without interruption. Any material coming into contact with this liquid undergoes gradual decay over a period of time, the rate of which is determined by the composition of the affected material. In each documented case, the process continues without arrest until the affected material has decayed completely, at which point it is indistinguishable from a pool of the original contaminant. Glass has been observed to react most slowly to the effects of the discharge, and this property has informed the construction of the item's immediate containment vessel. Living organisms exposed to the substance react in the same manner as inert matter, progressing through the same course of decay. No instance of recovery has been recorded, and no palliative or reversing agent has been identified. The origin of the liquid remains unknown, as does the mechanism by which it is generated or sustained. A further peculiarity has been noted regarding its visibility. The liquid can be observed only from the front of the mask. It does not emerge from, nor is it in any way visible from, the reverse side. Subjects who approach within 1.5 to 2 meters of the object, or who make visual contact with it, report a pronounced compulsion to place it upon their own face. This urge has been documented as strong, persistent, and difficult to resist without external intervention. The precise mechanism by which this compulsion is transmitted remains unresolved, though proximity and line of sight appear to be the principal vectors. When the object is affixed to the face of a human subject, an alternate brainwave pattern originating from within the object overlaps and superimposes itself upon that of the original host. This overlap effectively extinguishes the host consciousness, resulting in brain death. Following this event, the subject speaks and behaves as though it were the consciousness residing within the object itself, disclaiming any identity connected to the prior host. The bodies of possessed subjects undergo decomposition at a markedly accelerated rate. Tissues desiccate and shrink over a compressed time frame until the subject resembles a mummified remnant of its former form. Despite this progressive structural failure, the object retains cognitive control of the body it occupies. Coordinated behavior, articulate speech, and apparent volition have all been observed to persist well beyond the point at which the host anatomy would ordinarily cease to function. This control has been documented to continue even when the subject's body has decayed to a degree at which motion is no longer mechanically feasible. In such states, the object has been observed to attempt movement, to vocalize, and to direct the ruined body as though unaware or unwilling to acknowledge its physical limitations. The apparent intent of the occupying consciousness remains undiminished by the deterioration of its vessel. No comparable effect has been observed when the object is placed upon the face of an animal. In such trials, the object remains inert, and no transfer, compulsion, or physiological change has been recorded in the animal subject.